Hi, I'm your host Vasco Duarte. Welcome to the Scrum Master Toolbox podcast, where we share tips and tricks from Scrum Masters around the world. Every day, we bring you inspiring answers to important questions that all Scrum Masters face day after day. Hello, everybody. Welcome to a very special episode we have for you today. We have with us Gene Connolly and Jeff Campbell, friends of the show. Hi, guys. Welcome back.
Thanks for having us.
Hi.
So Jeff, as you probably know by now, if you heard this podcast before, he's an Agile coach who considers the discovery of Agile and Lean to be one of the most defining moments of his life and considers helping others to improve their working life not to be simply a job, but also a social responsibility. And one thing he's particularly proud of, and I'm particularly proud of having helped him do that, he's also the author of Actionable Agile Tools, published here with us at Oikosophy. You can get the book from Amazon or directly from the author at bit.ly/AAT book. That's all lowercase and one word. The link is also on the show notes. So that's bit.ly/AAT book. And Gene, who's also been on the podcast before, is a principal software developer at Meltwater. And he has dedicated his career to improving the quality of life of legacy software systems during their golden years and making the most complex problems you can find slightly less complex. We're going to talk about something that is not technical, though, although there's technology involved. So you guys organized an unconference back then when the time was so that we could even travel. Right? And you brought people from all over the world together to solve some issues at the company that required many teams to collaborate and therefore to interact and make agreements and decisions. However, this is 2020. We're just at the end of 2020 as we record this. And of course, we've been all cast to the remote realm. So how have you guys been able to adapt to this new reality?
You know, it's really ironic, Vasco. I think we recorded the episode about unconferences, and then, of course, they air a little bit after we record them. And I think it aired 2 or 3 weeks into the lockdown starting to begin worldwide. And we have this whole episode where we're basically advocating putting people in the same room and getting them together and all the great things that can happen as a result of that, which literally came out at the worst possible time in the last 60 years to do that. So yeah, it's been really interesting.
Actually, last 100 years, if you are referring to the last major pandemic.
There you go. I'm not very good at the estimation of the time, but yeah, I was thinking Spanish flu, which is like, the 1930s or 40s, right? Yeah, so it was really just horribly timed in that respect. And so you asked the question you originally asked is how are we adapting? And I think actually we're adapting surprisingly well to it. I've been a coach for a long time and I've advocated co-located teams for a long time. And I would be lying if I said I find all of this remote work to be as engaging as being physically in the same space. But I think what we're learning is it's actually not as detrimental as we thought it was going to be. And we're saying all the time now in Meltwater that we've actually been very productive throughout this whole thing. And I think what we're starting to learn is it wasn't as effective because we didn't focus on making it as effective, because it was always this thing we did occasionally, and something we tried to avoid, and we did half-heartedly is actually a great term. And now that we have no choice in that, I think we're becoming resourceful in a way that we haven't had to be before. And of course, there's even some benefits to it. And then, to hand over to Gene for half a second, he was very good when we get into talking about the unconference. I think everybody else was kind of like, okay, well, I guess we'll just wait and see if this is over. And that is not the attitude that Gene took, but I guess he can tell you about that.
Yeah, I mean, I think about this, how are you adapting? And I think adapting, there's no good adapting or bad adapting. It's just adapting, and you go through it and you persevere and, accept, right? You accept that things are changing or do your best to. And I think that's sort of what led to us trying to think about this unconference, how it was going to go forward in a way that was appropriate, is accept the new reality that we had and figure out how to adapt for better or worse.
So you guys were kind of, I imagine, I don't know if that's how you went through it, but you guys were, convinced yourselves that, a non-conference would be a great input to the organization. It would help solve problems, conflicts, lack of communication, what have you. And you were asking yourselves, like, how do we do this in the new remote context? Is that how it started?
Yeah. So I guess just for a little context, we've been doing it at Meltwater for many years now. I want to say 4 or 5 years, even maybe 3 or 4.
And always co-located,
Always
right?
co-located. We were doing it as I think we said we were trying to do them every quarter. I'm not sure we ever did them every quarter, but we were doing them 2 to 3 times a year. And yeah, basically putting people all in the same room and using sticky notes on a wall. And it was actually a very expensive undertaking, but it was one of the most successful we've ever had at Meltwater. Like, if you wanted to really solve the hard, difficult problems across the whole organization, that was very much the place to get it done. Very much the place where everybody could come together and just, in 2 days fix something that had been bothering us for 2 years.
And you did this every year, is that so?
Several times a year.
Several times a year. Oh my.
Several
so
times a year.
So it must have been really a shock when you guys realized that, oh shit, we need to do this remote.
Yeah. I mean, it was a shock. And I think that we were stunned for a little bit and weren't even sure how to proceed, right? I think that it became clear that, we needed to establish some sort of like feeling of connectedness, right? Reestablish connectedness across the organization. This event that we had regularly was something that was familiar and good. And it's something that we could potentially, bring that familiarity back to people. And then also what was really exciting to me about it was, reimagining the event in a way where we were to shed some of the assumptions that we'd made over the years, over the iteration and refinement and retrospection that we had done. We'd sort of, dug some comfortable grooves in how we did the work. And this was a great opportunity to throw it all out, start from the beginning and build something new, from the bottom up.
So you say that with a positive spin, which I appreciate, Gene, but I'm pretty sure that you were also kind of puzzled and perhaps anxious about how this whole thing would work. So what were the biggest challenges you faced in organizing this unconference, which you had done co-located, now remote?
Yeah, I just sat back and let Jeff endure all of the stress and waited for him to come up with an idea.
I mean, I don't think that's entirely true, but there's definitely one point to be made there was Gene basically consistently said throughout the thing, if this fails horribly, everybody's going to forgive us, because we did kind of have to accept that there was a possibility that this thing was just simply not going to work in the format that we wanted to try it. We really did have no idea if we were going to pull it off or not. So I think some of the biggest challenges, just the sheer, I don't know how experienced people out there are with coordinating large groups of people, but large groups of people are exponentially bad at following instructions, is something that I've learned.
Not just a little worse, a lot worse.
Yes, and the more of them they get, the worse they get at it. I really don't understand. It's not like they're unintelligent people, but when you put them together in groups, it's always instructions you feel are very simple break down really fast. So
maybe that's one tip. Never assume instructions are going to be followed, even when they are clear and easy to understand.
yeah. I think that's tip number one of any large facilitation. But of course, those problems are a lot easier to solve in the physical context when everybody's together in a room. At least if you're me, I'm loud enough to sort of overrule a room of people and get my voice heard and say, okay, guys, this is a problem. We need to fix this. But that's a lot trickier when you're trying to do this sort of thing online. So I think, making it understandable and intuitive to use, to me, was one of the first big problems that we had to overcome.
One thing that I think is interesting is that, when you're in a physical space, there are physical constraints And those constraints can help facilitate the meeting itself. Oh, we have a finite number of meeting rooms that can hold a finite number of people in those meeting rooms. And then once you move into the virtual space, well, those constraints sort of disappear. So how do you bring order?
Unless you put them there, right? So
yes.
So Gene, tell me a little bit more about that, though, and perhaps maybe you even have some examples of constraints you had in the real world, like the size of the unconference board, for example, that you tried to mimic, and maybe some that work, some that didn't work in the virtual world.
Yeah, I appreciate it, but Jeff really is the man to speak to this. He's the brains behind the board.
So actually, I think one of the ones we lost in the virtual world was the constraint of how many people could attend the event. So in the past, we were always limited by how many people it was financially feasible to send to a place. And these events are very expensive. You can imagine flying people from all over the world to, Toronto, one of Canada's most expensive cities, which was our second to last physical one, and then putting them up in hotels and all those sort of things. It made getting a ticket, a space at the event, sort of quite difficult. There was only maybe 85 to 90 was the most people we ever were. And both the benefit and the difficulty of suddenly saying anyone in the organization can attend, which is what we did. And I think I forget the numbers now, but I want to say we were as many as 280 people at one point during the event. But that did cause a lot of problems in, again, the physical space. People break into smaller bunches. They have discussions in smaller groups. There's the physical space mediates how people speak and how they talk to each other. Anybody who's ever been in a Zoom call with more than 10 people knows how incredibly difficult it is to try to have a conversation with a large number of people in a Zoom call. So something we did there, and actually I have to give a lot of credit to Zoom for this, is we used a piece of functionality that Zoom has called the raise hand feature. So we basically made it so that you have to click this button that says raise your hand, and we created a queue of people. So that's actually, in the physical space, we used to create a queue or a line of people physically in the space. We did that virtually using the raise hand feature.
So for those that are not familiar with Zoom, can you visually picture how that raise your hand feature worked, and how do you set up the Zoom meeting so that you can even see who raised their hands?
Yeah, so we have a blog post describing all of that in detail. So we won't go too much into it. We can link to the blog post in the show notes. And that contains a lot of the mechanics of how we made this thing work and the tooling that we used and stuff. But that's a little boring to describe too much in detail. But basically, there's a button in Zoom called Participants, and you hit that, and people can hit this button that says Raise Hand. And that means the first person that raised their hand goes to the top of the line, and then the next, and the next, and the next. And basically, I, as the facilitator, would call on each individual and say, okay, Gene, now it's your turn. And he would say, I would like to do session A in, time box C or whatever it was, and I would physically do the moving of things around. So whereas in the real world, he would walk up with a Post-it note and he would stick it on a wall where he wanted it. In the digital world, the actual moving around of items flowed through me, and we used this Zoom hand raise functionality to determine whose turn it was, basically.
So that's actually a good tip. I was at the Italian Agile Days late in 2020, and they had this shared Miro board. So Miro is just one of those other tools that you can use for massive online interaction, not gaming, but almost. And one of the things that I noticed is that it was very easy for the board to get out of control. So I'm hearing, Jeff, that you guys decided early on that the moderator is the only one that can move stuff around in the schedule board. Was that so?
Exactly. And we did that because of the scale of it, because I can say I've done 3 more small versions of this with 10 to 15 people since that event. And there's no need for that. We don't use the raise hand or everybody can put things on the board. In a smaller context, that worked perfectly fine. But I think, if we tried to do that in the bigger context, it would have been complete pandemonium. Just trying to edit a Google Sheet. I don't even think that many people can edit a Google Sheet at the same time, which is what we did for the board.
Yeah, I was going to say one thing I really think I appreciate about how Jeff proposed we, handle this meeting from the beginning was to really just sort of recreate to the best we could what we did in the physical event, right? And that had the effect of having people who'd been to the event before know what was up, right? We didn't totally shake it up. We brought a familiar format and a familiar order and tried to adapt the tools the best we could, even though we could have blown it up and done something with a Google Sheet or something totally different. We brought a familiar format and then just let the unconference do its thing, right? And build off the feedback that was provided by the attendees as the meeting went along. So I think that, starting with a familiar format and just letting the unconference be what it is and lean on the feedback from the participants was the most sort of like way to organically build something successful in our case.
Yeah, absolutely. And as we are talking about this, so you started from a format that brought familiarity. I think that's an important tip. But of course, the real world is different than the virtual world. You had to make some adaptations, some changes. So what were the biggest differences between organizing an unconference face-to-face versus now what you had to do during this COVID year, organizing it online?
So I think the first one was, like Gene said, we really was one of our objectives to keep things as much the same as possible. But we had to do a lot more sort of testing and iteration on the methods and approaches that we used. So every time we would sort of integrate a piece of tooling that was meant to make the process easier, we would then go, and much as you would when developing any other kind of software, we would try it out with 3 or 4 people. We would see what problems they had. We would watch them use it. Then we would try it out with 10 or 15 people, and we would see what problems they had by watching them use it. And before we decided this was good enough to bring to the group of, hundreds of people. So there was a lot more sort of preparation work in the preparing of the structure for the event than there would have been otherwise.
Yeah, one major hurdle that we had to overcome that we haven't touched on, but was a big challenge associated with dealing with this was time zones.
Oh, yeah.
We were in a situation where everyone was in the same room at the same time to all of a sudden people not even being awake and working at the same times. So figuring out a model where we could bring the most people in around the globe was a big challenge as well. And figuring out what the right format for the schedule was to sort of like get a lot of overlap, because bringing people together who are in physically different locations is sort of the benefit, right? So we didn't want to isolate it to time zones. We wanted to cross time zones as much as possible.
Yeah, and that would be one big lesson learned there is Jeff cannot be the facilitator for the entirety of the event unless he's going to work a 12 to 14 hour day every single day. So that was, we did start to wean off that a little bit by the end. I started to sort of hand that over to other people. And, once other people have seen you do it and they're accustomed to it, that's fine. But in the beginning, I sort of did that the whole time. And that was, I was pretty worn out by the end of it for sure.
So if that's one tip, don't have Jeff be the facilitator throughout the whole day or a single facilitator. So have multiple facilitators. Then what were some of the other major differences that the time zone requirement brought?
We definitely had to do more smaller plannings. We had to have planning more frequently. So on the physical event, we would have it twice a day. And I think we did 3 to 4 a day because our time zones span from Bangalore, India to San Francisco in the United States. So we were nearly the entire globe of time zones. So yeah, we had to, when a planning session would happen was very important because you needed to really take into account, okay, these people are starting their day, they need to plan what they're going to do. But also you don't want Europe to suddenly come online and have no input for the next 4 hours because it's already been planned. So there had to be a lot more frequent planning taking place and just a little bit a lot more thought into when exactly those plannings would happen.
Yeah, another challenge that emerged was arranging for breaks in the session, right? Whereas, again, when you're together, you can all take lunch together. It wasn't the same when you're all spread out over time zones. And so we were sort of initially faced with this question of, do we dedicate this valuable time to breaks, or do we just try and advocate and have people accept that, yeah, you're going to miss stuff, you're going to miss sessions, you need to take personal breaks, and you are in charge of doing that for yourself. And we went with the latter approach. There was a large amount of feedback, but it sort of was one of those problems that we never got around to a perfect solution.
I think it was, if I could disagree, because that's exactly what I was going to talk about as well. I think we kept deciding not to solve the problem because it was one of those ones where it's easy for people to dislike it. But when looked at it from the other angle, like if we plan lunch for New Hampshire, we're suddenly disrupting it for 5 other time zones, where they can't get the stuff done that they want to get done. So we were often choosing, like we continually got that feedback throughout the event. Central breaks, central lunches planned, and we continually chose to ignore it. We might look at a different approach next time because people really did not care for it. But there was also, it wasn't like we just couldn't come up with a solution. We actively chose not to.
But that's a good point. So what I hear, though, you guys saying is that you had some problems that you knew needed to be handled, but you explicitly decided to delegate the solution to the individual participants.
And I would say that we did that with many of the problems. And again, something Gene advocated throughout the event, right? We don't need to solve all the problems. We have a retrospective set up for exactly this reason. The attendees will come up with better solutions than anything that we can come up with. So,
and it's also the core essence of the open space technology, right? The law of 2 feet.
Yeah, exactly.
It's up to you to decide when you need to go.
Yeah. But, I have to say that is one thing that works. The law of 2 feet I have found is much more successful in a conference setting when not everybody works for the same company. For some reason, when we do these things working together, we have found, even in the physical events, that seems to be a lot harder for people to do. I don't know if it's because they know each other. People have a lot more trouble accepting that there's sessions they're not going to be able to attend. Every year, somebody tries to come up with an algorithm that will make it so we can plan absolutely everything so that we get the absolute top value, which is something you don't see at public open space events, right? Somebody just puts the thing up and they say, yeah, I'm going to have it at that time. You don't get a lot of the, can we move it here? Can we move it there? Or at least you get a lot less. That is something that the FOMO is real, the fear of missing out, if anybody doesn't know that expression.
Well, you guys came up with something for that thanks to this being remote, right? Like you started recording sessions.
That is definitely one of the big benefits. And we'll do a real quick shout out to this tool, Kiko Chat, QIQO chat that we used, which is sort of like a wrapper around the whole event. That made it very easy to find the rooms, and it made it very easy to record stuff because year on year, we tried to record the physical meetups. And it's not to say we got none, but it did not work well ever at any point. Was it, plug and play, very easy. You got good audio, the people could participate well. That never worked out in the physical events. And that was just click, and now we're recording.
All right. We're getting close to the end here, but there's a couple more questions I would like to go through, especially for the participants. I'm sure this was a very different event. Like you had more participants, as you said, up to 280 at some point. But how did this remote unconference feel like? What was different for the participants?
All I can think about is, how important this event, this is just a very personal thing with our company, how important this event is to the company and how much people have embraced it and how hard the participants wanted to make it successful. And they just came in with the attitude of like, we're going to turn this into something valuable. And it instantly, you could feel it, that it was going to be valuable and people were going to sort of bring what they have to the event. And it's an opportunity for people to share what they are passionate about and what energizes them. And whenever you have a format like that, I feel like it just feeds upon it. Over the course of a few days, it just builds people's, enthusiasm for sharing their experiences. And at some point, the fact that it was, over a Zoom meeting sort of fell away, in my opinion, from the event. Maybe the first day was awkward and we were all getting used to it. But by the third, we were just talking about, yeah.
Sorry, I even have to say on the first day, it really fell away. Like the main piece of feedback we got after the first day of retrospectives was, I can't even believe how well this is working. Which we couldn't either, frankly. We were not at all prepared for how smoothly the whole thing went. So I think the big feeling for the people was, A, they were happy it was happening, but also one of the biggest differences were so many people were able to attend who were never able to attend before. So many people were able to, I think of our Bangalore office, which had fantastic attendance this time. They usually get to send one or two people who have to fly for 24 hours in order to get there, and now suddenly all of them could attend for many hours of overlap. So I think the overwhelming feeling for the attendees was this has gone very well, and a lot of engagement. And this is really important to note. It was really at the point when COVID was really starting to hit home for people on how long we were actually going to be trapped like this. And at least for me, very much where I was starting to lose my energy, and I was starting to think, oh God, is this going to go on for, at that time, I thought another 3 or 4 months. And that was a long time ago now. It really did re-energize the entire organization, I think.
All right. So we've talked about the benefits. We've talked about some of the challenges. We've talked about some of the tools. And you guys wrote a blog post that kind of details, the tools, the setup that you had. I'll put the link on the show notes. But for those listeners who are perhaps interested in organizing this at their own companies, maybe to get that energy up just after another lockdown is starting at this point all over the world, how would they go about contacting you and getting your help?
I think reach out to me directly is the best way to go. I am Jeff, Jeff, at rebelalliance.se. That's Sam Eric or Sweden.
Yeah, it's the coolest company name ever.
It's a hate it or love it sort of situation. It's hotly debated amongst most people, but I love it. So I think reaching out to me directly, and of course, I talk to Gene all the time. So
absolutely, we'll put the link on the show notes and have an easy way for you guys listening to contact Jeff and Gene and get some more help if you guys are planning to organize one of these events. So we're close to the end. If we want to know more about you guys and the work that you're doing, let's start with you, Gene. Where can people find you and read about what you're doing?
Oh, I've got a small presence on Twitter, and that's about it.
And you guys also write regular blog posts at Meltwater's engineering blog, right?
Yeah. Great engineering blog. The link will be in the show notes.
So underthehood.meltwater.com, I want to say.
And how about you, Jeff?
Yeah, you can always find me at rebelalliance.se. That's the best place to track me down.
All right. So I'll put the link to all of those on the show notes, and also the link to Jeff's book, which has a lot of other tools to help facilitators, Scrum Masters, Agile coaches do their job even better. Guys, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much for your generosity with your time and your knowledge.
A pleasure as always, Oscar.
Thank you.
We really hope you liked our show. And if you did, why not rate this podcast on Stitcher or iTunes? Share this podcast and let other Scrum Masters know about this valuable resource for their work. Remember that sharing is caring.